Hello and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast, where we celebrate the legacy of Mrs. Bunny Mellon through the work of the Oak Spring Garden Foundation. I'm Chris Stafford and this is Season 2, Episode 1. On this month's episode, our guests are two experts on the subject of landscape and its history and sustainability. Paul Stamper and Paula Wyman will be joining me shortly to offer their unique perspectives on the land, the history, and the challenges of maintaining both beauty and sustainability in the present times. Later on in the podcast, we'll be hearing from the author Paula Wyman. But first, we're going to hear from Paul Stamper, who in June this year will be leading an immersive class on the grand history of great English estates and gardens. Paul takes a deep dive into how the English countryside was shaped by its great estates, the country houses, and the surrounding landscapes, from the formal Georgian parklands designed by Capability Brown to the eclectic and sometimes flamboyant gardens of the 19th century. Paul explores the evolution of these iconic landscapes and the architectural styles that have defined them. And he'll also be touching on the rise and fall of the country house, including how the early 20th century saw the golden age of English country house design, with notable figures like Edward Lutyens and Gertrude Jekyll. Paul will also discuss how these estates reflected the fortunes and aspirations of their owners and why so many have been lost to time. In fact, 2 a week were demolished in the 1950s alone. Paul joins me now to, first of all, give us some background to his experience in these subject matters and also a little bit more detail as to what we can expect during his course in June. Paul, thank you for joining me and welcome to the Oak Spring podcast.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure.
And you will be joining us in June for this course, and we want to give our listeners, Paul, a little bit of background as to your, obviously, deep history in the world of landscaping and English gardens and estates. You're immersed in beautiful countryside there in Northamptonshire, and a lot of history indeed, and we could have a whole podcast on the historical perspective and the context here of landscaping, of course. But let's start, I think, with a little bit of background, Paul, because this has been a lifelong commitment for you. Where did the initial passion for this subject come from?
Well, it goes way, way back. I daren't tell you exactly how old I am, but apparently when I was 6 years old, I announced to my mother I was going to be an archaeologist, and the poor woman didn't know what an archaeologist was. But it so happened that when I moved to what in England we call a grammar school, a high school, when I was 11 years old, the headmaster was himself very, very keen, and he ran the school's archaeology society. So from the age of 11, we were going out doing field work. We were exploring the landscape of Northamptonshire, where I live. We were doing what's called field walking in the winter, when you walk over ploughed fields, picking up pieces of pottery to identify where there were Roman and medieval settlements. We were visiting the earthworks of formal gardens of the 17th and 18th centuries, which was very, very forward-looking work. This is in the late 60s and early 70s. And then in the summer months, indeed, in August of each year, we were excavating on the site of a medieval village. I was so lucky to have that early grounding in English landscape history and archaeology. And then I went on to pursue it at university at Southampton. And then I've been working professionally in the field for 40 years, wearing various hats.
Where does your true passion lie then now when you reflect on your career and the extent of your career, Paul, and the subject matters that you've covered?
Well, it's definitely rural rather than urban. And it's very much the English landscape as it developed from the Middle Ages, in other words, in the 13th and 14th centuries, through the 17th and 18th. And actually, I'm more and more interested in recent landscapes of the 18th and 19th centuries. So I very much started off looking at the field remains of medieval villages, lost villages, they're called sometimes, places that were deserted in the 14th and 15th centuries, and the remains of the field systems around them, what we call ridge and furrow, which is like massive corrugations, really, which were deliberately created, seed beds created by ploughing in a time when there was no under drainage. So if you're going to get rainwater to run off your land, you had to plough it in such a way that there were these furrows running downhill. And very large amounts of ridge and furrow still survived, certainly until the 1970s and 1980s. Although sadly, since then, much has been ploughed up in the cause of agricultural improvement.
Indeed, and of course the ridge and furrow served a number of purposes historically, didn't it? I think it's something, as you say, that has been ploughed out with time. Unfortunately, so much has come under the plough in rural England. But I'm sure over the period of your career, you've seen a lot of changes, such as the demise of the ridge and furrow land. So give us some examples of other areas of the landscape that you've watched evolve in some way or fall under the hammer in the name of progress agriculturally? Well,
it's rather like, a pair of bellows in a way, bellows that you blow hot air onto the fire with, in the sense that things come and things go. One thing that's gone, very sadly, is quite a lot of England's ancient woodland that's been there certainly since the 17th century. It's much better protected now than it was in the 1960s and 1970s, when much was felled. But again, there's been a big change over my lifetime. Something else which disappeared when I was a young man were large amounts of hedgerows, because the fields that farmers inherited after the Second World War were fairly small, and they were really unsuited for ever larger modern agricultural machinery like tractors and combine harvesters. And so hedges were grubbed out across England, particularly in eastern England, East Anglia, as it's known, the big bulge that sticks out into the North Sea on the east side of England. I think in the 1970s and particularly the 1980s, people started to regret the loss of hedgerows, not only because of the effect their loss had on landscape character, in other words, what the countryside looked like, but also because of the loss it had on biodiversity, somewhere from the breadth of plant species, woody plant species that you got in a hedge, and also, of course, providing a habitat for birds. And so from the 1980s, government has provided grants to replant hedgerows, and because there's money available, it's something farmers have embraced with great enthusiasm. But of course, a modern hedge, splendid though it is, and it will look like a fully grown hedge after 10 years or so, it doesn't have the rich diversity of species and biological richness that ancient hedgerows have. So that's two examples of where there were very considerable losses in the post-war decades, the 1950s and 1960s, but where there's been a measure of reversal since really the 1980s.
And indeed, of course, we've also lost the hedge laying and the art of laying a hedge, and the craft there has not been passed down through generations because of the demise of those original hedgerows. And the same, I think, goes for stone walling too, which is most prominent in some parts of England, not least of all the Cotswolds, but also in Northamptonshire. And I think that too speaks to a loss of an art form and the craft form of stone laying and hedge laying.
That's very true, Chris. But again, I sound a more optimistic note in that, again, with the conservation movement and the requirement for, as you say, dry stone walls to be repaired and indeed reinstated where they've been lost. And another example we might bring up is the thatching of roofs with wheat straw or reeds, according to which part of the country in. The authorities, the local authorities now, for instance, require you to replace thatch with thatch. You can't take a thatched roof off and put a tiled roof on, a shingle roof on, to use the American word. And similarly, the grant support for hedgerow replanting and hedgerow maintenance has meant that I think there's been something of a revival in hedge laying and the number of younger people that are doing this. And again, too, same again with dry stone walling. It is now seen as, a very respectable craft skill, which people who are conservation minded are very keen to enter into those professions.
Well, that's very welcoming news, that art is not dying, that craft is not dying. It is a unique skill. And I also thinking in terms of the evolution of agriculture in our lifetimes, Paul, is the introduction of the European Union and the rules, of course, and protocols that it had imposed on British landscape, particularly agriculture. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Because that, and now that the UK is no longer in the European Union, I wonder if you've seen some changes in terms of its impact on the landscape.
I don't think so. Not recently. Certainly, when we joined Europe in the early 1970s, it was good news for farmers. There was grant aid available, and that's when they set to increasing the amount of arable acreage in England with a vengeance. But of course, as I mentioned, that was not particularly good for the traditional landscapes of England. So that's one area where European money was very good for the farmers and arguably far less good for the landscape of England, the rural landscapes. Farmers, have been very, very grateful since then for the grant aid and support which has been forthcoming. Because certainly in England, it's still the case that if you've got a small farm, say of 150 acres or less, it's very, very difficult to make a living from that without the various forms of grant support which you can apply for. And there have been big changes over the last year or so in what support is going to be available to farmers. There's going to be more, we think, for environmental support and schemes, looking after rivers and streams and hedges and so forth, and far less direct support for agricultural production. I think it'll take a few years really for this to work itself out, and we can really see whether this is beneficial or not for farmers, and for the landscape.
And of course, there is the quotas or lack thereof now, because that was a major impact of the joining the European Union on British agriculture.
That's right. Yeah, they're yes, good things and bad things. My former brother-in-law was a dairy farmer down in Surrey, to the south of London. Very small farm indeed. He was milking about 70 head. And he was using grant aid and so forth to make a living. But when the restrictions, we're going back now into the mid-1980s, when the restrictions came in, bizarrely, on how much milk his cows could produce, it meant that his farm was no longer viable indeed. And so he switched over to livery, to having people keep their horses on his farm. Which is very sad because that farm had been established for 500 years or so, and it was a perfectly viable dairy farm until the system of government support changed.
Well, all of this, of course, speaks to the evolution of the English countryside, and certainly in the 20th century and 21st century now, and also to the buildings, the houses, the estates that are such an integral part of the British landscape. And this is something, of course, that you'll be covering in the course that you're presenting in June here, Paul. So let's talk a little bit about that historically and what you'll be bringing in terms of your experience with UK heritage and some of the properties that you've worked for, because I know where you are right now is you're surrounded by beautiful historic buildings, just Burley, Chatsworth, Blenheim. I mean, we could go on. There's just so many beautiful properties. But you mentioned that there have been a loss of some of these since during our lifetime, at least in the last 70 years.
Yeah, certainly. The great losses of English country houses. We have to take a step back into the later 19th century. Farming had been very, very prosperous in the middle of the 19th century. And then in the 1870s, because cheap imports started to come in, grain from the United States and Canada, frozen meat coming in on refrigerated ships from Argentina and from New Zealand and Australia, it meant that agricultural prices in England plummeted downwards. And that meant that farmers found it very hard to make a living, to pay their rents. And it was those agricultural rents that supported the great landed estates and country houses. And so what we see from the 1880s onwards is the great estates trying to sell off farms, not with a great deal of success, because tenant farmers know that they would really, really struggle to make a living from agriculture. And certainly from around the time of the First World War in 1914 to 18, there are huge numbers of the great landed estates are put up for sale. And a lot of them fail to find a buyer, and instead they're sold to the demolition men who take them down and they sell the stone and the timber and the very fine fireplaces and inside and the panelling, some of which is shipped off to America to adorn houses on the other side of the Atlantic. And then after the First World War, and the pattern continues through to the Second World War, and of course in both world wars, country houses are requisitioned by the military as messes for particularly officers who don't always use the houses particularly well, using their revolvers to take pot shots at the ancestral portraits, or when a few drinks have been had, swinging on the chandeliers. I don't think these are all apocryphal tales. Whilst in the park, there are often military encampments or training grounds for tanks. The military don't look after these houses very well indeed. The basic maintenance, keeping the gutters clear and the downspouts, that work is just not done. And so rot often sets in. And so when the families reclaim these houses in the late 40s, early 1950s, they're often in a terrible state, as well as being far, far bigger than the families want to live in. And so again, there's no option but to sell these to the demolition men. And in the early 1950s, it's reckoned that about 2 English country houses are being demolished every week. It's quite staggering. In the 1970s and the 1980s, a few architectural historians start to protest against these losses. And there's a very celebrated exhibition that was held in London on this theme that opened many, many people's eyes to the losses of country houses that have been over the previous 50 plus years. And since then, the rate of losses has slowed, well, beyond a trickle. It's ceased. And it's only the odd tragic fire like East Clandon down in Sussex. It's only the odd tragic accident that sees losses of country houses these days. And so the country houses themselves, I think they're pretty safe. What has been going, particularly over the last, 30 years or so, are the agricultural buildings that were part and parcel of the home farms and the wider estates. They've not been lost to demolition usually, but they've been lost. Their character has often been changed as they've been converted into houses or to workshops. And the number of working farms or farmsteads that there are across the English landscape is ever fewer as agricultural units, if you like, farms, get ever bigger along with ever bigger machinery. And so, again, when I was a boy, I drive about in Northamptonshire, and if there were agricultural buildings, whether it was a single one or whether it was a courtyard farm, they would all be in agricultural use. These days, that's actually exceptional. And most farmsteads you drive past along the road, they've been either turned into a house or there's a series of little business units there offering dog grooming or come and have a cup of coffee, that sort of thing, often split into 7 or 8 units. So good news on the country house front, but on the agricultural buildings, whilst they're still there, their character has been changed a lot over the last 30 years or so.
Yes, and I believe there has been incentives too to convert the agricultural buildings on these estates.
Well, indeed, and government policy, has changed several times. The government's advisor on everything to do with what we call the historic environment is the state organisation that I used to work for, which is now called Historic England. And when I started my career with Historic England back in the mid-1990s, it was very much opposed on policy grounds to the conversion of agricultural buildings, whether into houses or into business units. But over the last 10 years in particular, it's come to an acceptance that those conversions are necessary if the buildings are not going to fall into disrepair and ultimately to be demolished. So again, I think we talked earlier on about changes to hedgerows and woods and bridge and furrow and so forth. There's also been the changes to the actual agricultural buildings from which those landscapes are farmed.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the architecture that I know you've enjoyed. Obviously, the work of Capability Brown comes to mind with Burley Estate and others, and I'm sure you've worked with so many of these in your career. Paul, what can we expect on this course that you will share with us of your experiences?
Well, I think the first thing to say, Chris, is that nobody should be frightened of my course, because I always, as it were, start with an assumption that somebody knows nothing, whether it's about country houses or whether it's about medieval farming. And I will start from, the absolute basics and work upwards from that. So I'm going to be looking at actually very much what we've been talking about, which is a mixture of buildings and landscapes, and how the two knit together and are indeed interdependent. So with, for instance, the story of the country house, I'm going to go back to medieval manor houses, and I'm going to move forward from that, looking at how architectural styles have changed over almost 1,000 years, reflecting both changes in architectural fashions as well as changing lifestyles. I've got some really, really lovely examples drawn from across England of that, many of which I do know firsthand. And similarly, when I look at the countryside, the landscapes around those country houses, particularly estate landscapes, I'm going to start off in the Middle Ages. And one of the lectures or talks or presentations that I do that's always popular is one where I look at the medieval agricultural year using manuscript illuminations. In other words, pictures from contemporary manuscripts, moving my way through the agricultural year, starting off with ploughing in the autumn, and then moving through into the harvesting of meadows and harvesting of cereals in the summer, and the cutting of woods and so forth for timber and wood for the fire. That one's always popular. But I do come up to the present day. We've been talking a few minutes ago about the decline of the country house and why that was in the later 19th and 20th centuries. And I'm also going to be looking at the impact of the 2 world wars on the countryside more generally, because that really did see some very radical changes, some of them short-lived and others which we can still see around us today. So it's a very broad-based course indeed, and I'm working up a few new talks this year. It's much my own amusement as anything else. And everything is really, really well illustrated. I think it's only when I'm putting these talks together that it's brought home to me just what a richness of buildings and landscapes that we have in England, and also what enormous regional variety there is. And that, again, will be a consistent theme is looking at what things are like in the different parts of the country. Landscape character, as it's called by the professionals these days.
You use the word richness there, Paul, and it makes me then look at the context of this conversation. Really, is that there is wealth, the wealth that was, and the wealth that still is to a certain extent, or maybe to a lesser extent, in terms of the landscapes and the properties that we're talking about, that are historical. Some are protected by UK heritage, of course, but there was a time when every village had a manor house and manor farm or a larger house. I think of some of your locals, Holmby House and Althorpe House. A lot of these, maybe smaller, of course, but everywhere across England had these village communities, which had the lord of the manor, so to speak. And this is all, of course, from wealth. And I'm wondering if you can contextualize the changing demographics of that wealth that have impacted the English heritage in terms of the landscape and particularly the buildings.
Well, I think what I stress, Chris, is that in every village, I think it's fair to say, there would have been an enormous spectrum in the population from the very wealthy living in the country house or the manor house through the relatively prosperous farmers, perhaps farming 50 acres or so in the 17th or 18th centuries, down to the poor cottagers and people living in often, indeed, abject poverty, with many, many children living in what contemporaries called hovels, which might just be a 1 or 2 roomed leaky cottage, the poor widows and so forth that were reliant on charity within the parish and so forth. And again, their dwellings, the farmhouses and cottages, again, that's something which I'll be looking at in the course in June. And I find those, what we call vernacular buildings, just as interesting as the great polite ones. Now, I'm using 2 terms there, and again, this is the kind of thing that I'll be introducing people to. 2 bits of technical vocabulary there. Architectural historians, they divide buildings broadly into 2 halves. There are polite buildings, which have been designed by an architect, like country houses, in the latest fashions of the day. Whereas vernacular buildings are those which are run up by local builders or even by the householder themselves, using locally available materials that might be limestone on the Cotswolds, or it might be timber and mud in East Anglia, building those buildings in a style that's unchanging over many, many hundreds of years. That's vernacular architecture. And in most villages, there would actually be a mixture of the 2, in that the manor house or the country house would be a polite dwelling, whereas the houses of the farmers and the cottagers, they will be vernacular dwellings in a very local style. And indeed, even today, notwithstanding the huge numbers of modern houses which are going up everywhere on the edges of villages, as I drive across England, which I do once or twice a week for work, it's very, very noticeable when you're in the local buildings, the farmhouses and cottages, when you're moving from one type of landscape to another, because they'll have been built from the local stone, whether it's ironstone, which is got a brown colour, or limestone, which is yellow, or they're built from, if there's not much stone to be quarried thereabouts, they'll be built using timber framing and so forth. And again, the different kinds of roof covering. Are they thatched? Are they slate, blue slate from Wales? Or are they reddish, curvy pantiles, which we have in my part of the world? So that differentiation, that regional differentiation or sub-regional differentiation in vernacular buildings is, for me, actually one of the great joys of England. As you move around, everywhere is a bit different.
You've just added 2 new words to my architectural vocabulary, and that is polite and vernacular.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, I absolutely delight in words, and over the course, I shall be introducing a lot of specialist vocabulary, but always explaining it, and also giving, in some instances, the background to words which we're all familiar with, but where people might not realise quite where they come from. One that springs to mind is aftermath. We can have the aftermath of the ball game saw huge amounts of litter in the streets. Aftermath is actually the grass that's left in a meadow after it's been mown. So meadow which produces hay, that rich grass that feeds animals through the winter, that's the mowing takes place in June or July. And what is left, the short grass, which is what animals graze on and start to be fattened up for the winter on, technically that is the aftermath. But the word has, its meaning has changed over the centuries. And there are quite a few instances of that I shall be drawing attention to, because I think it's absolutely fascinating.
And certainly, yeah, and there are plenty in agriculture. Paul, before I let you go, is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners that they can expect for your course in June? Anything else you would like to add?
One thing we haven't talked about, Chris, are designed landscapes, which is a slightly, not a terribly descriptive term really, but it's what used to be called historic parks and gardens, which is one of my particular interests and specialisms. So we'll be looking at the gardens, the formal gardens around country houses, the parkland at Capability Brown, the informal parkland that he introduced from the mid-18th century. We'll be looking at the very formal gardens, again, that the Victorians reintroduced in the middle of the 19th century. We'll also be looking at other types of design landscape. I'll be touching on them because they're so intimately related to the gardens and parks around country houses. Cemeteries, for instance, the great Victorian cemeteries were designed by exactly the same people that were designing the formal gardens around country houses, and using exactly the same components in terms of the layout with lodges and boundary walls, and also in terms of the planting within the evergreens and so forth. Yes, so something we'll be looking at in several ways is the historic parks and gardens of England, which I've spent a good part of my career working on.
Well, all that to look forward to, and a reminder to you all that deadline application is March the 3rd for that course, June the 9th through the 13th that runs. So be sure to go to our website, osgf.org, and sign up there. Paul, a very happy New Year to you. We look forward to seeing you in the summer when things will be looking a lot different to what they do now at Oak Spring. So again, thank you so much for taking time to come on the podcast, and we look forward to that course in June.
Indeed, I look forward to being back at Oak Spring, which is always an absolute joy.
Our next guest is Paula Wyman, the author of Bad Naturalist, My Journey Through the Wilds of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Paula's story is a humorous and deeply personal account of her efforts to restore and protect a piece of land in the Blue Ridge foothills. What started as a simple backyard ecology project quickly turned into a massive conservation effort as Paula navigates the complexities of invasive species, rattlesnake encounters, conflicting expert advice, and the inevitable setbacks of land management. With lyrical storytelling and a passion for preserving the natural world, Paula shares how she came to understand the land not as a neat, controlled space, but as a vibrant, chaotic and resilient ecosystem, teeming with life and hope. Paula has also been a resident at Oak Spring. She first attended as an interdisciplinary resident and then returned as an alumni resident. Paula, welcome to the podcast and a very happy New Year to you.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Well, we are excited about you coming back to Oak Spring. You're becoming quite a regular here, aren't you?
Oh, well, it's really wonderful and hard to stay away.
How did you discover it when you became a resident? Do you remember how you found Oak Spring initially? Because you're a local through and through. You haven't strayed far from home, as I understand it.
I haven't. I remember reading about the formation of the foundation and the wonderful resources there. So I had sort of followed stories about Oak Spring in the news in the past several years. And I guess one of those times I must have seen a mention of a residency program, and I became really excited. and it sort of it coincided with the time that I was working on this book, which was such a perfect fit because the book is, as you already know, it's a memoir about my attempts to restore native meadows on a mountain in the foothills of the Blue Ridge, and about the obstacles I encounter, the many mistakes I made, and the failures and successes and the discoveries I made along the way. And one of the first things I needed to learn at the time that I started this project, I knew nothing about plants, which seems like, why did I start this project when I knew nothing about plants? But I've always been passionate about conservation and nature, and very focused on insects and different kinds of wildlife. And so I came to plants that way. And when I realized that Oak Spring offered all of these resources, the library, the meadows that are in the process of being restored, just the staff is so knowledgeable, and not to mention the quiet time to work, it just seemed like the perfect fit.
Well, indeed, the Blue Ridge Mountains can be seen from Oak Spring. You can almost fall into the shadow at sunset of Blue Ridge Mountains, so to speak, not too far from the Appalachian Trail. For those who have not been to this area, we hope you will come, and we hope you will come in January when we hear more about this new book that you're launching in January here, and in a very short time, you will be here at Oak Spring again. But before we get into the book, Paul, I want to hear a little bit more about your background and this passion that you clearly have, and your interest in nature and the natural world and preserving it, because this has been a passion project, literally. So tell us a little bit more about your background in the rural space of nature.
Well, when I was a kid, and I was a suburban kid, I was born in D.C. and I grew up in the suburbs. I was outside all the time when I was little, and I was always looking at bugs. I would let them crawl on my arms and legs. I would collect cicadas. One time I collected 100 cicadas in one of those bug houses that you could have when you're a kid. And I would just watch them. I would collect caterpillars and wait, hopefully, that they would, make a cocoon and turn into a butterfly, because at least I knew that much. That's what they were supposed to do. And as I got older, I did things like try to save, sometimes in the wrong way, try to save creatures that I found, like when we would take occasional trips to the beach, I would find horseshoe crabs on the beach, and I would be sure that they were supposed to be in the water. So I would toss them back into the water. And then when they washed up on the beach again or climbed up on the beach, I would bring them to our room or wherever we were staying and try to put them in the bathtub and, pour some salt in there, thinking that I was doing a good thing. And as a kid, I was also very focused on what I could do in my life to be around animals. And the only thing I really knew about, well, there was farming and there was becoming a veterinarian. And I tried a little bit of both. I was a junior farmer briefly when I was maybe 10, 11 years old. And I shouldn't say I tried veterinary medicine. I absolutely didn't. But I was a big fan of the James Herriot books and the memoirs, All Things Bright and Beautiful, All Things Great and Small, that he wrote about being a large animal vet in the Yorkshire Dales. And I really wanted to be just like that. And then at some point, I realized that kind of interaction with animals was different than the kind I was really looking for. And I ended up becoming a writer, but I always wanted to be able to incorporate nature and science into my work more. So when I was in graduate school for my MFA at American University, they allowed me to do an independent study with the biology department, which I was getting an MFA in literature. So it was kind of it was an unusual thing to do at the time. Maybe it happens more now. So I studied conservation biology for a semester with the guidance of a biology professor there, and it was really wonderful. I ended up writing a paper on gray whales, and I went on to write a feature story on the Galapagos Islands for a magazine. But interestingly, it wasn't until now that I was able to apply some of that to a full-length book.
So how did you arrive at this? It's a passion project, as I said, and often we have passion projects which don't materialize for various reasons. I mean, this is a big undertaking, what you've done. So tell us how you got it off the ground, no pun intended.
Well, first of all, when I first came to this place, I thought we were just here to see the view, because it's a stunning, unusual view. And that's, of course, we ended up buying the land, and, but I had always been doing a lot of reading on conservation, and I was reading about this new approach, or somewhat new to me anyway, called rewilding, which Isabella Tree talks about in her book, Wilding. I had just read that book, which was about bringing nature back to her 3,000 plus acre farm in England. And I had read Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy, which was encouraging people to convert parts of their lawn in the suburbs to native plants, and the reason why that was important. So I had all of this in my mind, and I had the idea, because we were looking for a place. We were empty nesters, and we were ready to make a big move, and we were looking for a small place in the country, and I was thinking I could plant a small native meadow. And then we came up onto this mountaintop, and acres and acres of rolling hills unfolded in front of me, a very unusual open meadow on top of a mountain that has been open for hundreds of years for various reasons. And I thought, okay, I was thinking really small. I was thinking about this small native meadow patch, and now there are these acres and acres of old fields in front of me, and just think what I could do here. And despite the fact that I was never good with plants and didn't know very much about them, I was sort of thinking of it more from a whole ecosystem aspect, like all the wildlife here, all the birds, the insects. And I just decided in that moment, oh, this is what I should be doing. There's a reason why I came here. And this place, I could really do something special. I could really make a difference.
Do you feel that you have fulfilled that dream with this book and with the work that you've done?
Well, I think it's in process. This is an endless project. And I think I realized that even at the moment I decided to take the plunge, and that it's going to be the preoccupation of the rest of my life, because nature keeps going. It doesn't stop changing. It's endless what will need to be done here, and especially the continuous managing of invasive plants is something that I can never just kind of look away from and say, oh, I think I'll ignore that for a few months.
Right. I was wondering, though, nature never dies, of course, so it is an ongoing, but once you buy land, but if there's a box you feel that you can check now.
I guess I do feel like at least I've gotten the process going. I've started to turn things, I hope, in the right direction. I really felt good after, let's see, in 2021, I think it was, 2021, scientists from Virginia Working Landscapes came out. That's part of the Smithsonian here. And they did bird and plant surveys on the mountain so that I could see what the baseline was. What did we have generally? And then I did, hand removal, mechanical removal, some spraying, some burning, all the kinds of things that ecological restoration involve at various times. And just recently, one of the people who did the survey came back and she said, "Oh my goodness, I can see a big difference here." And I felt so good about that, because when you're in a place and you see it all the time, sometimes you don't notice, from day to day, I might see new things, and I'd certainly I'd heard new birds, seen new birds, seen new plants. But I don't get a sense of it because I don't have that distance from it. And so that really made me feel like I am headed in the right direction.
Of course, when we immerse ourselves in nature or anything agricultural or anything in terms of, the natural landscape, we learn things about ourselves too. Paula, I'm wondering, during the course of this project, what you feel you've learned about yourself.
That's a great question. I think taking on such a big project, which was for me very ambitious and it presented a big learning challenge. I really didn't know anything. As much as I had read as a hobbyist about conservation, I had so much to learn, and I talked with so many experts who were willing to come out and share their expertise with me. But I leapt into it without fully understanding what I was getting into. And I think I kind of did that with the book as well. Because it was new to me. Writing a memoir was new to me. Writing about nature to this extent was new to me. And I think it gave me some confidence that I can take on something entirely new and not, that it's okay to get out of my comfort zone. And that was really, I think that was a big deal.
How did it feel to hold up the mirror, though? Because sometimes we're not comfortable with that. But did you get into a comfortable place to expose yourself to the extent to which you did with this title?
Well, I was very uncomfortable with the idea of memoir, to be honest. I keep saying I want to take the me out of memoir. I did have to push myself to think back and, write about what I was like as a kid and write about, what my family dynamic was like, which this isn't a trauma memoir in that sense at all, but still writing about myself was daunting. And even the title of the book, the working title I originally had was Pointed at the Land. And the publisher came up with this very catchy title, Bad Naturalist, which was pointed at me or at me as the character in the book. And at first that made me very uncomfortable because I thought, oh no, the attention's supposed to be on the land here, not on me. But I came to terms with it.
You found a level of comfort by the time you wrapped it.
Yes.
When you look at the book now, though, Paula, the synopsis often, when we write a book, the synopsis at the start that we present, maybe, and the one that we might write now might not be the same. I'm wondering how your synopsis would be on reflection now of this book, and if it achieved what you hoped it would.
I think it is pretty much exactly as I described that. I was pretty sure when I started, because I was already several months into the actual project before I decided that I wanted to write a book about it. So I already knew that I would be encountering obstacles.
You had a head start.
Yeah. So I feel like the synopsis that I had in my head really does fit what happened and what continues to happen. Just the mix of obstacles and mistakes and, tempered by the occasional success and my self-doubt when I make a mistake or when I fear that I've made things worse. And then I realized that this happens to everyone who's doing this kind of work, that there is no perfect answer in conservation. There is no one right answer that can be applied generally. It depends. It always depends on where you are, what you're doing, what you already have plant-wise. You can't just make a blanket assumption that certain fixes or tasks will have the same outcome on different land. So,
has the book shifted your focus at all? Has it taught you something that has changed your direction in terms of future writings?
Oh, well, I definitely think I would write more about conservation and nature, perhaps from a different angle. And whereas maybe when I first started this book, I thought, well, I'll go back to fiction after this because my first book was fiction. It was a short story collection. I really don't have any desire to do that now. I really enjoyed just being able to write about what I saw. And I mean, it is hard in a way not to be able to make stuff up.
So seeing rather than what you're imagining is going to keep you in the nonfiction lane, is it?
There is still imagination involved in it. But yes, in a way, because there are so many discoveries still to be made here. I'm never going to run out of subjects, and I'm never going to. I write out of a sense of curiosity. That's where my drive to write comes from. I'm deeply curious about what I'm writing about, and I can't write about it unless I'm deeply curious about it. And right now, and probably indefinitely, I'm deeply curious about what is happening on the mountain, all of the interconnected lives here, the interconnections among plants and insects and birds and wildlife, and unexpected connections that I've discovered and those that I have not yet discovered.
And of course, inevitably, given the subject matter, that there are going to be humorous stories as well and encounters, which I read that there was one with a rattlesnake. Or was that a solo event, or is that a common recurrence?
Oh, the rattlesnake in the basement. Yeah. You know what? I have not, the person I mentioned in the book named Adams, who does our bush hogging, he says we have a lot of rattlesnakes here, and I believe him. He does not. He said, he told me that even though I have snake-proof boots now, there's no way I should go like wading into the middle of the meadow in the warm season.
Good advice.
Yes, good advice. So I've seen more black snakes, more rat snakes than I have seen, and garter snakes than I have seen rattlesnakes or copperheads, and that suits me fine.
Yeah, the ones that are really good for us, but serve a purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
Serve a purpose other than to terrify us.
And we have so many rodents here. It's really important that we have those snakes.
Yeah. I'm wondering about bears, too. You're in that part of the world where bears wander.
We do have bears. Yes, we do have bears. And we have some trail cameras, and we've seen them just about every spot that we've put a camera. And one of them was right above our house, just walking down the driveway from early one morning. But I didn't see it personally. I had a picture, and
you were fine with the picture.
Yes, I'm fine. I'm fine with it. And we see their evidence. I see their scat, especially because we have this grove of this very old cherry orchard, and when the fruit comes out, I will find scat full of cherry pits.
Yes, very common
around the orchard. Yeah. Not to mention the broken branches all over the trees.
I'm sensing a sense of humor in you, Paula, and it probably comes across in your writings too. I wonder if you can relate any stories from the book that would amuse our listeners and entice them to come to the book signing and your presentation.
No. Oh, okay. Well, let's see. I think maybe the way I write about things, I definitely make fun of myself a lot. And when I was dealing with, I mentioned Adams, he would often try to scare me with stories about things that, he would tell me about somebody pulling on a pair of pants that was in their laundry basket and being bitten by a very dangerous spider and having to go to the hospital. So now every time I have my clean laundry, I fold it and put away immediately because I'm so worried about it. I know it's ridiculous. And then he was teaching me how to use a brush cutter, which for me is kind of heavy, but it has a strap and it has a very dangerous revolving, rotating knife, because the idea is you want to cut through very heavy brush. So he was teaching me how to use it. And while he's teaching me, he's telling me this story about these two people who were brush cutting together. And one of them this is a horrible story. One of them died because he was caught by the other one's blade. But he told to me, and I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? I'm holding a brush cutter, I can't. So it's both a sad story that becomes a funny story, but really, every time I see someone in a tractor, I worry about it because, we have so many hills here and it's very steep and it's kind of dangerous if you don't know what you're doing.
Well, with nature, of course, it becomes the wildlife, but also you obviously have an interest and a passion for animals as well. Talk us about how they got into your book.
Okay. Well, I think I tell a story in there about I wanted to expose my kids to different kinds of animals when they were growing up, and we couldn't really have dogs at the time. And I think they were studying terrariums in science. So I got this terrarium and a mail order kind of thing. And I got tadpoles and we were going to watch the tadpoles turn into frogs. And it was really exciting at first, except when I tried to feed them the crickets kept jumping into the little pond in the terrarium and they would immediately drown. And the frogs were not interested in eating dead crickets. They wanted things that were moving. So eventually the frogs died and it was horrible and sad. But that was the kind of thing that would happen to me. And until my son finally said, well, someone gave us some hermit crabs because they were moving and couldn't take them along. And he said, well, if we don't kill the hermit crabs, then can we get a dog?
So eventually
we got a dog. Yes. She's on the cover of the book.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hopefully she's protected from the bears and the rattlesnakes.
Yes, she is. Yes, she stays with us. She stays close. She is very curious. She's very interested in the rabbits. We have a lot of rabbits. And she's interested in the birds, but she doesn't chase them. She just stares hard at them. And, just all the smells. But as far as the animals here, I became interested when I discovered, for instance, that there were vole tunnels all throughout the meadow that I at first thought were just I thought they were mud tracks of some kind, made by a bike tire. And it turned out they were tunnels, and there were all these voles here. And so I became very curious about whether that was a good thing or not. And I had realized that I needed to ask that question and not immediately jump to voles are bad, because if you have a garden in the suburbs, voles are usually bad, right? They eat the roots, they'll girdle seedlings. Not that I ever really had a garden. I was always so bad at that. My husband is a gardener. He does a great job. But I thought, okay, if there's so many voles here, what is it about this place that they need, and are they supporting something? Because too many times I'd ask the question the other way and immediately become alarmed, as in, oh no, there are so many voles here and I'm not about to get rid of them, but what am I going to do and what does that mean? So instead I try to sort of ask a question from the other direction. And that's when I learned how useful the voles were or are in the meadow. And when you have acres of meadow and you're not worried about them getting into your trees or your flower garden or your vegetable garden, then they're really very beneficial in a lot of ways, which I talk about in the book.
So what next, Paula? Now that this book is on the shelves, what's your next project? Do you have one lined up?
I do have one in mind. I'm not quite ready to talk about it, but it is somewhat aligned with some of the ideas that I raised in Bad Naturalist.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to what comes in the future, but for now, we very much look forward to you being here on Thursday, the 16th of January here at Oak Spring. And be sure to go to the website osgf.org to sign up for that, to get your tickets. And that event will be in partnership with Middleburg Books, which is on South Madison Street in Middleburg, just down the road from Oak Spring. So, Paula, we look forward to you being here. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come on the podcast and to agreeing to come back and tell us more about your book here at Oak Spring.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely talking with you.
And once more, those dates to keep in mind are January the 16th at 4:30 p.m. at Oak Spring, where Paula will be in conversation with Charlotte Lorick. That's at 4:30 on January the 16th. So be sure to pop over to the website, osgf.org, and get your tickets for that event. And a reminder, the dates for Paul Stamper's course are June the 9th through the 13th, but that deadline application is March the 3rd. So be sure to jump onto the website, osgf.org, where you'll find the application form for that course. And finally, a note on other events in January. We're going to be welcoming back alumni for our residency and fellowship programs. It will be a pleasure, as always, to see some very familiar faces over the coming weeks. And we're also thrilled to host a series of workshops led by our talented artist alumni. These include a wood engraving workshop with Mandy Bonnell and the first session of a 4-part embroidery series with Hilary Waters-Vale. These are all coming up in the early part of this year, so be sure to go over to the website again to sign up for these courses at osgf.org. We are delighted to be able to share so many of these courses and workshops with you, thanks to our artist alumni. And finally, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're at Instagram at Oak Spring Garden Foundation, on Twitter at Oak_Spring, and on Facebook at Oak Spring Garden Foundation. And as always, you can sign up to the Oak Spring newsletter by going to our website, osgf.org, or if you prefer, you can drop us an email as well. If you have any questions, you can reach us at programs@osgf.org. My thanks again to our guests this month, Paul Stamper and Paula Wyman, and to you for listening. I'll be back next month with another episode of the Oak Spring podcast. In the meantime, from all of us here at the Oak Spring Garden Foundation, a very happy new year.